Hello, and welcome to Lion and Mouse Commentary. We're your hosts, Tori,
And Holland.
two best friends as different as a lion and a mouse. Today, we're reviewing Super 8, and we'll be ranking it on an objective scale of 0 to 10, with only 2 points allotted for personal taste. So feel free to agree, disagree, or just learn about something new. Just be sure to tread lightly because there are spoilers ahead. Cut to the intro. Alright, welcome to the Lion's Den, safe enough to host a mouse. For our new listeners, we'll be breaking down the scoring system by category as we go, but the full breakdown is also available on our socials and website. So let's get started. Today we're going to be reviewing Super 8. This is a movie from 2011 by Paramount. It was directed, written, and produced by J.J. Abrams, also produced by Steven Spielberg and Brian Burke. We have a running time of 112 minutes, a budget of $50 million, and a box office of $260 million. It stars Joel Courtney, Elle Fanning, Kyle Chandler, Gabriel Basso, Noah Emmerich, and Ron Eldard. That's the top 6 billed cast. And for a quick synopsis, Joe Lamb's a 14-year-old kid struggling with loss and has committed himself to helping his best friend Charles make a zombie film on his Super 8 camera. Along with their extended crew of friends, they enlist the help of a local schoolgirl, Alice, who quickly becomes part of their friend group. While filming a scene at the local train station, they witness a terrible and strange accident which starts to uncover a military research secret. Odd events start happening all over town, including dogs running away, electrical power outages, and electronic items going missing. The kids realize after reviewing their footage from that night that the culprit may be something otherworldly. And after Alice gets abducted, Joe resolves to save her, enlisting the help of the rest of his friends. So, we have broken down our ranking system into categories. The first being plot and story delivery, with a total of 2 possible points for movies. So I've talked a lot. Holland, why don't you jump in first for us?
Okay. Yeah, sure. So for plot and story delivery, so I gave this out of 2 possible points. I gave it 1.5 points out of 2. So we do have half point system of our scoring because some of these are pretty tough to kind of determine if it's 1 or 2 points. I did 1.5 points. So kind of some things that I thought was really good as far as like storytelling and one of the things that I thought was really notable was the pacing of this film. It's done so well. I find that watching movies, I feel like I always get to a point watching a film where it's like there's this action scene that drags, or there's a dialogue scene that just seems so long, or the tone of the movie just lulls, and there's like a part that you just like during your second and third watch through, you just fast forward through that part because it's boring. It just fails to grab your attention. Or when you're watching it at home, you like pull your phone out and like scroll through Instagram while you're waiting on that to end.
What's new on Twitter in these boring scenes?
Right, and I feel like Super 8 does such a good job. I didn't notice any point in the film where that happened. So I feel like the pacing is a really positive like aspect of this movie. In delivering the story, we're going to cover characters in more detail next, just as a caveat to this, but in the first 15 to 20 minutes of the movie, you establish who these characters are, you know who each of these individuals are in the film. Joe and his friends are introduced right in the beginning of the film with his dad, that character, they're introduced and you kind of already have this kind of undertone of conflict, and mystery going on. So I really liked that part. Some of the things with the dialogue and writing, I found that like not every, I feel like that's a really strong statement, but with the writing of the dialogue, I felt that like every line of the dialogue was essential. There wasn't any like extemporaneous
no throwaway lines.
Yeah, or it's like the like characters are in peril and they're deciding to have this like really important conversation, and it's like some, a monster is crashing through town and these characters are talking about their life stories. Like that drives me crazy. That moment didn't exist in this film. So a couple things I thought were really innovative with the plot overall, like the fact these are kind of getting into spoiler territory now. But the fact that the alien in the story is subterranean, that he digs and tunnels, that's really new. I think not something, or maybe not new, but something you don't really see a lot. Mm-hmm. A couple of things I had to deduct half a point because there's a part of the movie where, so throughout the film, Joe's like holding onto this locket that's like his mom's, and I feel like that is in the movie they're kind of using it as symbolic of like his grief, or it's symbolism. Then he pulls it out and he's just holding this locket because his mom's dead, and that's like his mom's locket. Blah blah blah. And there's like a part of the movie. Blah blah blah. Don't laugh at me. There's a part of the movie where the kids sneak into this school and the military finds them. Out of the whole town, the military figures out they go to school, which to me, I feel like that's never explained. For one, why are they at the high school or middle school chasing these kids around when the whole town is evacuated from, they've evacuated the whole town, and then they decide, oh, these few kids that escaped our little evacuation camp that have just figured out, maybe they're at the school, we'll go follow them there. So one, I thought that was kind of, a little unbelievable. And then there's a part where the Air Force guys show up and they grab all these kids out of the school because they found this like top secret information. And then the Air Force guy, like, they take, this one kid has firecrackers and they take his stuff away. It's like, okay, that makes sense. Like, take away the explosives from the child. But then the guy takes Joe's locket away from him, an Air Force guy. It's like, why in the world would an Air Force
I'll take this.
Yeah, I'll just take this locket from you. Oh boy. Like, why? Just because we need to know you're a bad guy? Like, why does an Air Force guy need to take a kid's locket away from him? It's like, there's nothing dangerous about that. It's just his personal property. I just thought it was just so ludicrous that it bothered me. So, because of that, I gave him, I took half a point away because they're, like, I just thought it was ridiculous. Like, one, why are they, like, chasing kids to a middle school while a town is, like, exploding? And then two, why is a military guy stealing a locket away from a middle schooler?
Maybe he thought it was pretty. He wanted it.
Yeah, he's gonna give it to his girlfriend when he got home? That makes no sense.
Honey, look what I stole from a child.
Look what I stole from a child and brought home for you. So that's kind of my scoring system. Some of the things that I kind of liked and didn't like about the movie overall.
So for me, I only gave it 1 out of 2 points for plot.
I'm surprised.
And I'll get into a couple reasons why. I do, however, think that the initial setup shot is very good at kind of setting the stage when it's just the factory accident counter. And it just sets up, and you see the worker changing it to 0 days since last accident. Yeah. And so, like, that's the very first thing that we see. And so I think it kind of sets up that, like, oh, crud, something bad has happened here. Yeah. And then it kind of cuts to, like, Joe on the swing set. And I think that that's kind of like, it's almost like it's just a really nice, I think, like, story delivery to kind of, like, we don't know anything about this kid, but with that shot, we can understand that, like, he's going through some sort of loss. Right. So I think that that's a really good thing. You mentioned the pacing, and I wanted to talk about that. There is one part of the movie that I think the pacing is not good, but otherwise I think the pacing works really well. And I've noticed that the humor in this movie is very much attached to the pacing. I don't know if you noticed that, but when there are humorous moments, it makes the movie, it's almost like a sense of momentum. When they use humor a lot in the dialogue, especially just in the kids' like friend group, it there's a lot of momentum behind their humor, and I think it's because there's a lot of scenes that are funny, but there's a lot of talking on top of each other. But because of that, it just kind of like pushes everything forward. So I think
So you're
that,
saying that in a positive way?
yeah, I am saying that in a
Yeah.
positive way. Now, where I think the one part of the movie that the pacing does not work, and this kind of falls into like a little bit of a trope maybe with these kinds of movies, is that I feel they drag out the reveal of the alien too much. Like, I understand for a majority of the movie, you're going to kind of want to keep the visual of the alien secret. But I think there comes a point in the movie where it's like we need to see something to almost instill like a sense of panic or fear in the audience. And they drag that out way too long. And I think that if we had seen the alien 15, 20 minutes earlier, even if just a portion of it, I think it would have almost kind of ramped up the tension of the movie. I think they drag out the reveal of the alien too long.
So I think it's interesting you say that because I was reading a little bit up on, some kind of behind the scenes facts. And I think that it is, I do agree, it is kind of a trope that you don't reveal the monster till the end. I think that's, and especially in, movies set in, especially now that movies set in like the 1980s have gotten really popular, and that's kind of an 80s horror flick trope, 70s, 1970s, 1980s, 1990s horror films, were kind of like the classic in horror. For the kind of a lot of movies nowadays pay homage to a lot of that. So I understand like not seeing the alien to the end is kind of the trope. But I do think that it's interesting that J.J. Abrams, in developing this film, almost made the decision to not show the alien at all. That you would never see what the alien looked like or, any aesthetics of
And
it.
I think some people might disagree with me because I think for some viewers, it may put more tension into their minds to not know what they're dealing with.
Sure.
But for me personally, I think seeing the alien is a little bit more frightening because now it's like I can see the actions and kind of like persona, size, like all of the things that we associate with like scary things about an alien.
Yeah.
It's like having those fears confirmed is almost worse for me. So I wanted it earlier.
Yeah.
But I think some people might disagree with me and say like, if I don't know what I'm dealing with, that's scarier. And I think that's a valid take.
Right.
But for me personally, I think the other way.
Yeah. I think though that in not showing the alien, I think this is an interesting kind of two sides of that perspective. I think in not showing the alien, I think it makes it a better film because in my perspective watching this movie, it's like it's a movie about these characters that happens to have an alien in it. It's not an alien film that happens to have kids in it. So I saw it as more of a like advantageous to delivering the story because the movie's not about an alien. The movie's about these kids and these characters and this boy who's lost his mom and his relationship with his dad and his relationship with his friends. So the movie's about those people. So I personally saw it as a story choice because it's really not about the alien. The alien's kind of the catalyst to the overarching story.
I sort of agree with you, but not entirely. I think where I differ is that I do agree that the movie is more about the characters. However, because of this particular thing, I felt like it slowed the whole movie down for me.
Okay, I think that's fair.
And so that's kind of why I see it more as like a negative. Because just those moments, I'm kind of like, okay, so, but like, when's the next thing happening? I was just like waiting for the next moment, and I felt like that gratification was almost delayed a little bit. But then once it finally did come to fruition, it wasn't so satisfying that I felt like it was worth the wait.
Yeah. That's fair.
And then the only other note I have about plot is that I absolutely love that they gave us the Super 8 film in the end credits.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Because I just think that like it really kind of tied the whole movie together. It'd be like, okay, these kids have been working on this film through this entire movie, so I want to see the film, and I would have been mad if they had not given us the final product. Yeah. So I'm glad that they did that. But still, that only left me with 1 point to give for 1 out of 2 points to give for plot.
Yeah, for sure. I know. I think that's totally valid. And I agree. I can't stand it when it's like these kids are working on this project. Like, if in the instance of Super 8, these kids are working on this project and then you don't even show me at the end, like, what the movie looks like, I feel like I've been cheated out of an experience, you know? So, and plus, I think that they do a really good job of making that Super 8 film in the end credits look like a film that kids made.
Yeah.
And not looking like this overproduced...
A movie that J.J. Abrams made.
Correct. Exactly.
Right.
Yep, for sure. Yeah.
Okay, so that's good. So for plot, I settled with 1 point and you settled for 1.5.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. Yep.
You gonna take it away into the next category?
Yeah, so next category we cover with movies. So overall for movies, our next category is characters. So for movies and film, we have that a total possible 3 points. And I gave this 3 out of 3. I think this just like, I could probably talk for a whole hour on these characters in this movie because I think the characters in this film are so well developed. They're extremely well developed. They're believable as like middle school boys. Like the way they talk to each other, the way they, you know, mess with each other, the way they talk over each other, the way they joke around. I mean, even the character of, like, Charles's sister, I can't remember her name right now, but that, like, weird stoner guy.
I know she's played by Ally Michalka.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I don't remember her character's name.
The weird stoner guy that works at the Kodak place,
Yeah.
like, how he's like, let me get a date with your sister or whatever, and, like, they keep that thread through the whole movie, and how he, like, drives these kids into a war zone to a middle school just to get a date with this girl. Like, I mean, some, like, stupid stoner guy probably really would do something like that. I like that the kids in the acting in this movie, it's one of the few, I think it's so rare to watch children actors in movies that don't act like child actors. They act like children. And these kids that are playing characters in this movie act like those children.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is the casting was done very well. I kind of contribute that in the characters, although I guess technically it's part of the story delivery, like casting. And, you know, it could go either way. I like that there is essentially a love triangle between characters with Charles, Joe, and Alice.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it never feels like this tropey, overdramatic, melodramatic, you know...
It's not like a soap opera love triangle.
Right. And it's done like these are two guys that like this kind of, to the audience, this mysterious character, girl. And, you know, the way that they both approach this character, the way that their personalities are different, is done really well. I think, let's see. I think I made a note that Joe as a character, it's clear that he has a crush on Alice, but it doesn't become consuming in that is his whole identity.
Yeah, it's never cringe. One of my notes is that like overall I think Joe is just such a likable kid.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's young and so he has a lot of those young tendencies, but he's never like cringy or annoying.
Yeah.
And I think that applies to like his kind of crush on Alice, is that it's almost like the kind of crush that you want to see from characters, where it's just like genuine, pure crush. It's not like he's doing weird, wacky things to try to get her attention. He just likes her and likes being around her.
Yeah, and he wants to just be her friend.
Right.
And he appreciates that she's a friend to him. One thing I think is extremely rare in movies like this, when you have your protagonist that has... It's kind of tropey to have a main child, male protagonist who has a poor relationship with his father. And I think that can be very overplayed. But I think one thing they do with Jack, Joe's father in this film, you immediately dislike him right off the bat because he's like, I'm going to send you to baseball camp for the summer. Like, he clearly doesn't like he doesn't approve of Joe's interests. He doesn't approve of him, like, making your stupid movies with your stupid friends kind of
Also,
thing.
one of the first, I think it's the first thing we see from Jack is at the very beginning of the movie when Alice's father shows up at the
Yep.
funeral and they immediately get into like a
Confrontation.
tussle, like
Yeah.
like straight up like physical confrontation. And so I think that kind of paints a picture in your head. You almost have like this sort of bias already built
Yeah.
at that point where you're like, oh, he's just like,
It's his wife's wake, and he's
yeah,
like going almost fist to fist with this guy and putting him in a cop car and leaving
Right.
his son at his own.
and so you're like,
wife's
dang, what is
wake.
this dude's problem? Like you kind of have this like thing with him at the beginning.
But then one thing they do so well with this character, it's like they bring this man down to the lowest level to where you don't like him at all. But then they're like, oh, well, as you watch him interact with these Air Force guys that have come in and the shady stuff that they're doing, and they're coming in and intruding on his turf and treating the people of his town poorly, and now he becomes this kind of like hometown hero in a way. They don't glorify him, but they use that to reveal his character that, okay, this is a good man. Like, yeah, he doesn't understand his son, and he's not a good dad, but he's a good man.
Mm-hmm.
So it gives you hope towards the end of as the film progresses. You're like, maybe he's okay.
It's
maybe,
almost like a slow reveal of like the reason that Jack comes across the way he does and the way that his relationship with Joe is literally because he is soaked with grief and has no idea how to navigate that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as you learn that, he becomes a lot more interesting and likable, to be honest.
And then it really culminates, I think overall it culminates when he's in the car with Alice's dad, and they both have this same goal to save their own kids and find their own kids and rescue their own kids. And he says to Alice's dad, it was an accident. Like, and it's almost like you're watching this, and the kudos to the actor that plays Jack. I don't know his name, unfortunately, but kudos to him and just his delivery of that. It's almost like he's saying that to himself to kind of finally like let go of that bitterness he has. And it's like, it was an accident, it was tragic. And, people that have lost someone to something that tragic, it's an accident. And, there's, at the end of the day, he has to let go of that anger and that bitterness. And so you watch him like have this moment where he kind of lets go of that. And then you for the rest of the film get to watch him sort of reconcile with Joe, not to the point where it's like, oh, they're this great big happy family. And, but you at the end, you see these two characters and you're like, I think they're going to be okay. I think they're going to do well together.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing I think with kind of, they do this really good job with these characters of kind of this Joe, you have Joe versus Jack, like Joe versus his dad. And it's like this great juxtaposition between Joe and Jack in that Joe just really it sounds so like corny to say it, but like Joe just wants somebody to see him for who he is. And Jack doesn't do that, but Joe finds that in Alice. And I think that dynamic between the two characters, it really just validates Joe as a character. So yeah, so 3 out of 3 for me. Yeah. I just think it's great.
So I also gave 3 out of 3 points for the characters.
Nice.
Because I do think that's kind of where this movie shines, is in the characters. So I already kind of mentioned that, like, I think Joe is just like such a likable kid. And I think it's very rare to find a movie where children are the main cast and whoever the main protagonist child is just very likable.
Yeah.
Like, I find myself more often like kind of annoyed, but I never usually hold it against them because I'm like, well, they're a kid, they're going to be annoying anyway. But like, I don't find Joe annoying at all. I find him very likable, and like, I just think I don't know. I really don't even know if the actor who plays Joe has really done anything notable since. He's
now, as a, like, an adult, has actually done some Netflix movies.
I should look into them because I just think he's very good.
I've heard they're not good. I have not seen
darn!
them, but yeah, they're kind of like cliche chick flicks where he plays
Future
the leading
episode?
male. Yeah, probably. Yeah. But I believe he's in the Netflix movie The Kissing Booth. I think he's in that one.
Okay.
Don't quote me on
Okay.
that. But yeah.
There's a few moments that I wanted to point out, and they do hinge on some dialogue, so I almost put this into plot, but I think what makes the dialogue in these instances I'm going to bring up so good is the delivery by the actor in the context of that character. So that's why I'm lumping these into character moments.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
There's a moment near the beginning of the movie where Charles's father tells Joe that he always has a place here.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that moment so poignant because you've learned just in the few minutes of setup before this has happened that, like, Joe and his father obviously don't have a very good relationship.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like you can kind of see Charles's father and you see that their family is just like a chaotic, loud mess, immediately. But I just think it's such a cool moment that Charles's father would make it a point to tell Joe that, like, he always has a place here. It's almost like he's trying to, like, step forward a little bit and be like, I know you and your dad don't have much of a relationship, but, like, if you need some sort of dad, like, you know, you can come to me. And I think it's not something that you often see from, like, dad characters, unless it's like to their kid. It's not something that you see a lot kind of like extended outside of like the quiet, intimate moments between main character and dad, you see that sometimes, but like I just thought, and it's almost delivered like a throwaway line, but like you said earlier, there are no throwaway lines in this movie. So I think thinking of it in that way, it just hit a little bit harder. There's also I just think that the friend group, I could talk about each one of those boys, but Martin cracks me up all the time because he's got such a weak stomach and he just like gets so upset and like barfy at everything, and I just love it so much and it makes me laugh all the and he'll get like upset and he'll like start to like gag and then his like eyes water and he's like wiping his eyes over in the corner. And I just think that the friend group is very chaotic, but I think all of the boys who play their, all of their parts do them in such a way where, like you said, it's very realistic. It's kind of like, yeah, these are just middle school boys and you just really buy it.
Yeah, I think on that note with like a character like Martin, which I was watching this movie and I was like trying to be really critical because I knew this movie is not blind for either of us.
Yeah, it's familiar to both of us.
I knew that I liked the characters in this movie, and I was watching it really critically, trying to find like, okay, is there any of these boys who ends up being just completely useless in this friend group? And I was watching, and I was like, Martin is so quiet. He's like kind of in the background. Like, why is he in this movie? And then the third act of the movie, when he's behind and then Joe's dad goes to him and is like, you better tell me where everybody is. And he's like, okay.
Yeah.
So even none of the characters in this movie are useless.
Yeah.
They all have purpose and to move the plot forward or show something about another character. And so they're all necessary, I think is really rare in a movie like this.
Another scene I want to talk about is the scene where Joe and Jack finally have their confrontation.
Yeah.
And, I think the big line that everybody that I've talked to about this movie, which is admittedly not many people, but the handful of people I know that have seen this movie are like, yeah, I just love that line where Joe's like, she's nice to me. And it's a great line, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
Because I think it says a lot about what Joe's looking for at that juncture in his life, which is just somebody to be dang nice to him.
Mm-hmm.
And, but the line for me in that whole scene that I think hits the hardest is Jack's line when he says, it used to be somebody else, but it's just me.
Mm.
And I'm like, oh, because then you kind of feel for him and you're like, you're right. Like all of that stuff that Joe needs, he used to find that from his mother. And he used to get those things from his mother. And you see that also later when Alice sneaks into his room and the projector starts playing and she watches the clips of Joe and his mom. And Joe talks about, like, she used to look at me, like, really look at me.
Yeah.
And he doesn't get that anymore. He's seeking that. And you realize that like Jack doesn't know how to deliver those things to his son because he relied on his wife to do that.
Yeah.
And he's too busy avoiding the grief to work through it enough to like figure out like how, what sort of things needs to shift in my relationship with my son so that my son gets what he needs.
Yeah.
Which it used to be provided by his mother. So that line where it says he just says, it used to be somebody else, but now it's just me.
Yeah.
Is really, I think it's really important.
It is,
to
and
the whole
it's really neat
scene
you say
and
that.
story.
Yeah, it's really neat you say that because I always have heard. I didn't even think about this till you just mentioned it just now. Like, I always thought he was talking about the police force because the sheriff's gone.
He is. And in the context of the line, he is. But in the context of the movie, he's talking to Joe.
Yeah.
He's maybe saying it so that you think he's talking about his job.
Right.
But in the reality of life, he's talking about the fact that he is the only parent now.
Yeah. And clearly Joe had this bond with his mom that Jack didn't have with Joe. And so now it's like, that's kind of mind-blowing. That's good. That's really good.
Thanks.
Yeah. I think also, the line where Joe says she's nice to me about Alice, I think that line has so much more impact the second watch through, because when you hear later Joe talk about his mom and how she just saw him for who he was. And so when he's saying that Alice is just nice to him, and then you also see his dynamic with these friends, like his friends aren't really nice to him.
They're not really nice to each other.
Charles is like his best friend, and Charles is not nice to him.
That's my next point, is that I think watching this movie this time kind of critically, I realized what Charles's problem is with his relationship with Joe.
Yeah.
And the problem with Charles is that Charles wants all of these things and he does not effectively communicate any of them.
Yeah.
And so all it does is cause conflict between him and Joe all the time. And because Joe's personality is submit and just make people happy and be there and do the thing, I think it frustrates Charles because Charles almost feels like Joe doesn't really care enough to speak up or like say anything.
Yeah.
And it's almost funny because I think it sometimes reminds me of me and you.
Yeah.
Not that you don't effectively communicate, but that like I have a tendency to just be like, yeah, it's whatever. And I think sometimes you'd rather just be like, I want you to actually tell me what you're thinking.
Right.
And so I think for that's kind of what happens with Charles and Joe sometimes, is if Joe would just say what he was thinking, Charles and him could talk about it, or if Charles would just verbalize what he's expecting or wanting from a situation. Because like if Charles had mentioned way earlier in the movie that he was doing this whole thing and invited Alice to do this movie because he liked her, it would have shifted everything about Joe's perspective on the movie and his friendship with Alice. And then Charles gets frustrated because like, I did this because I liked her. And Joe's like flabbergasted because he hasn't done anything wrong. He hasn't, tried to steal the girl or anything like that because he didn't know. And that's on Charles. That's not on Joe, but it causes this conflict because Charles just doesn't communicate anything. And then he gets frustrated and it comes across as like, he's just not nice because of it.
Yeah. But I also think it's pretty realistic. Like if you kind of think back to like your middle school days, like you have really immature relationships with people. And I think it's done very well that you kind of get this picture that Charles and Joe have had this long-standing relationship where Charles was like the take charge, coming up with all the plans and had all the ideas, and he could say anything and Joe would just give him whatever he wanted and be his buddy, and they would just do things together, and they both got along that way. Not that, not painting Charles in like a super negative light.
Well, no, because I think it benefits Charles, especially in the context of their Super 8 film, because he is a good director and he knows what he wants and he has a vision and he can instruct people to do things. So I think in the context of that, like, his personality is not always a negative thing. It has its time and place, and it, is very beneficial in some ways, but because he's young, he doesn't know how to like fill in the gaps of the negatives of it.
And then you kind of get this picture that Charles and Joe have, like, grown up together, and so Charles has just gotten really used to just getting what he wants out of Joe, and, like, if he needs something, Joe's there, and if he wants something, Joe's happy to accommodate. And so it's almost like you get to watch from this, like, outside looking in of, like, the first time that Joe tells him no, and it's hard for Charles to really kind of come to grips with that, but you don't see it as this big massive conflict. You just see it as these real people having a real conversation as you're watching these two boys kind of learn how to have a more mature relationship together. And I think that's almost never shown in movies with children as your protagonists. They always end up having this, like, immature, like, petty little fight, and, like, you know, getting mad and quitting and doing something stupid to each other. And I think it's amazing that in a movie where there are, what, like 4 or 5 boys, like, all, like, doing stuff together, none of them end up doing something stupid to the point you'd be like, no friend would do that to another friend. So yeah.
I have one very small final note on the characters.
Shoot.
And it's toward the end of the movie when they have some of the kids in the bus after they've gotten them from the school.
Yeah.
And they're driving them back to the camp or whatever. And the bus breaks down, right?
Sure.
And they hear the alien.
Yep.
And the commander, the colonel, tells the bus driver, go out there and look around. And the bus driver, I love this man, because he just gives him a look like, are you freaking, like, kidding me right now? And that moment alone, I was like, I like that guy. He just, like, turns around and looks at him like, are you joking right now?
Yeah, he almost looks at him like, you go out there and check it out, sir. Like,
it was so funny. So I had to write that down just because it was so funny. So that's my last character note. But 3 out of 3 points for both of us in that category.
Yep. All right. So our next category is aesthetics, and so this kind of includes, you know, anything visual. So fight scenes,
or
lighting,
audio.
Yeah, visual or audio. So fight scenes, lighting, sound, special effects, you know, things like that.
Costumes, etc.
Yeah. So I gave this, so I'm a little torn, and maybe Tori might sway me on this one. So I'm a little torn. I'm between, like, 1 and 1.5 points out of 2. I think I think the thing that impressed me the most is, when I was watching it for this podcast, was the use of sound. So not just the way that the sound, you know, is, you know, balanced in the film or whatever, but the use of sound. So, like, in the opening scene when Joe's sitting there and that you hear that click of the locket, it kind of establishes that as the, I guess it's kind of a MacGuffin, but not really.
It's a vague one,
it's
but
like a vague MacGuffin, so that, you know, the click of the locket kind of ends that scene and ends the prologue. You know, that's kind of the sound that ends the prologue. The use of silence is really well done. You know, in the train wreck scene, there's, you know, a moment of just almost no audio. And so...
Well, and I think in those moments of silence, you also have to remember that it's not true silence, but they use proper, like, what you would call room tone. Because it's like, even if you're in a room by yourself, nobody else around, no sound at all, there's still, like, ambient noise from your air conditioning or just, like, the acoustics of your breathing. Like, this is stuff you don't think about, but like, silence is never truly silent. And it's the same with this movie. So they do use silence, but it's not, it's realistic science. Silence.
And then the other thing I think they use very artistically is lighting. I think sound and lighting are used pretty artistically. But, like, for example, a scene when Joe and Alice are talking about Joe's mom, that projector lights them from behind. And then aesthetically, I think I appreciated that during that whole scene, the two of them never look at each other. So it's an intimate moment for them, but it doesn't feel like an intimate moment between them. It's an intimate moment that they're sharing together, but it's not about each other. And I think that just that visual decision to have them not face each other keeps it from being this like almost like forced romantic moment while they're talking about Joe's dead mom.
Well, and I think it's appropriate too for their age range. Like, you
Mhm.
don't want to have this forced like sexual tension between two 12-year-olds or
Yeah.
however old 14. They're both supposed to be 14, but they're still really young. And it's like, I think I agree with you is like in those kind of situations, like it could be really awkward or forced,
Yeah.
but having them both kind of more immersed in the memory and like Joe kind of sharing that like really vulnerable memory with Alice without it being like a connection between them technically
Right.
is very effective. So yeah.
So I do think I'm kind of where like negatively I'm kind of hesitant on the visual effects though. I think for the time I think the practical effects, so like Alice's zombie makeup in that movie is exceptional in my opinion. I think it looks great. It looks like a kid, that's very skilled put that makeup on her, but it still looks convincingly like a zombie. Like that's just that's great. The practical effects in this movie are great. The CGI effects in this movie, specifically for me, the visuals of the alien, I'm just like, it just doesn't look good. It doesn't hold up. Maybe at the time, if I could transport back into when did this movie come out?
2011.
2011.
Yeah.
I said 2012. If I could transport back into 2011, maybe I would say it's really good. But today, watching it today, it's like the CG just it's not great. I think the visually, I think that in the scene in the movie where the sheriff is at the gas station and
Yeah.
you see
I have some notes on that scene too.
you see the reflection of the alien in the gasoline on the floor or the puddle on the ground. I feel like that is when the alien looks the absolute best. Is when you really don't see it well. And then in the final scene, when you see the alien, you're like, oh, he really don't look that great. So I gotta
Me too, what happened?
Yeah. So I gotta kind of deduct points for that. And then the other thing, and I know it's kind of memed at this point, is J.J. Abrams and his dang lens flares. Like, I'm sorry, dude. Like, I get that you think it looks cool, but it just looks artificial. Like, when you see a real lens flare on screen, it can be very aesthetically pleasing. It can have, it can cause, a dynamic moment or, accentuate, the other visuals on the screen. But it's like, I feel like so much of this movie, there are lens flares where there should not be lens flares. And I think
my opinion on lens flares is lens flares are kind of like spice to a dish.
Yeah.
If you have too many, you're not tasting the food anymore.
Right.
Like you have to, if you got too many lens flares, you're no longer appreciating your shot. You just are, wow, look at those colors in that prism. And like, that's the only thing you think about. So I think I agree with you. It's a J.J. Abrams thing and just lens flares galore. It's like, if we had cut out like 5 or 6 of those lens flares, other lens flares in the movies would have been more effective, more appealing, I guess.
Yeah. So I think overall for the first 2/3 of the movie when they're building tension about, what does this alien look like? You see this old, like, grainy footage of the scientist feeding this meat to this alien, and you're like, you don't get good visuals of the alien. I feel like that's when the alien looks best, is when, so aesthetically, I think that it's a well designed alien, but only when you don't see it very well. And then the other thing, actually, I think I would give it 1 out of 2 points, because we talked about this, offline before. There are times in this movie where the transition between dialogue and sound effects in like action scenes or explosion scenes in the train wreck gets so loud you have to physically turn your TV down. I feel like that's just, and after we talked about it and talking about how that's poor sound mixing. That's not there's nothing wrong with your TV when that happens. Like, the editors didn't make it good enough for you. And I to me, that's a pet peeve. So I think I would give it 1 out of 2 points for that.
Is that it for you?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
it for me.
I'm also going to give it 1 out of 2. I agree with you on pretty much every point. I think the sound is the best aesthetic bit of this whole movie, with the exception of that mixing. I think it's one of those things where it's like, you either bring your dialogue up or bring your crazy loud sound effects down a little bit, because even when you're in a movie theater, it's like you're like cringing a little bit. You want to like hold your hands over your ears when it gets crazy loud. And like in your house, you're playing with the volume through the whole movie, and like, who wants to be doing that? So that's definitely one of the detractors. However, I think as far as the use of sound and the soundtrack, soundtrack for this movie, so good. It's the songs they pick are just so good. And another J.J. Abrams trope is fiery explosions, everything. Like, the train scene is nothing but just explosions and shrapnel and lights and wow, what is happening? I don't know. It's just chaos everywhere.
I've seen enough YouTube videos of trains hitting cars, and I don't think I've ever seen one explode like that.
No, they don't.
Yeah.
They just don't. So it's just there. And I get that part of this is like part of the genre.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to like hate on it too much, because, you know, for people who enjoy this genre, and this is like their genre of movie, like, these are expected things. So I don't want to critique it so much that it's like, you know, it's terrible and nobody should like this, because some people do like this and this is fine, but I just find it excessive sometimes. And I'm not against an explosion, but like 6 minutes of explosion is a lot.
That's true. It does feel long.
Yeah.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah. The gas station scene, I've noticed that they have a whole lot of instances of like color temperature use. And I think it's because the scene takes place at night, but the gas station is still pretty lit up, and it's all fluorescents and neons. So it kind of gives almost like this ghastly glow to everything, which I think adds to the tension, especially when you see like the reflection of the alien in the puddle and all of that good stuff. So I think in that case, like, that's a very good use of like visual effects. But really those are more practical effects. They're not CGI, because I agree with you. I think some of the digital and CGI effects are just not very good. I don't know a lot about CGI, so I don't want to try to say that I do, but there's just, it almost disconnects you a little bit from the believability of it.
Well, I think where we're both kind of circling around trying to land the plane on that is, I think that even in older films like, you know, Jurassic Park, there's CGI that looks like it fits in the world you're watching.
Right. And everything should be cohesive. And I think the scenes with the most CGI feel the most disconnected from the rest of the movie. And I think that's why it's a negative. I do think they do a great job with all the 70s aesthetics. So whoever did all their costume design, props to them, because I think all of the kids look great. I just think like overall costume, I checked with you and my dad about the military uniforms, and both of you confirmed that those are pretty legit. They're pretty period accurate. And then of course, you know, all the civilian clothes and everything. So I think as far as like the 70s aesthetics, I like when the scene where Jack goes to the car lot and like all of those cars are very period, and I think that was very good. So that's all good stuff. But I will say, as much as I don't love the ending of the movie, I can kind of take it or leave it, to be honest with you. I do think it's a fantastic shot at the very end when Joe is holding the necklace and it's pulling. I'm not talking about story-wise. I could take it or leave it story-wise. But visually, the way that that is framed and how that light kind of like glints off
Locket.
the locket,
Yeah.
and you're seeing all the shrapnel and everything flying behind them. It almost looks like a backwards meteor shower, which is just very appealing, just the way that the shot looks.
All right, okay. I'll give you that. I thought you were going somewhere else.
Nope.
With that.
Oh, really?
But yeah, I'll give you that. I could kind of take or leave the final scene with the spaceship.
That's more of a plot point we didn't even talk about.
Yeah,
but like
we didn't.
I'm kind of like meh about the ending.
I'm gonna cover it in our next category.
Okay.
But as far as aesthetics go, the spaceship at the end, I'm kind of like, we built up this like, oh my gosh, there are these cubes. What are they for? He's building a ship. Oh my gosh, like it's a spaceship, and then you see the spaceship, and you're kind of like, I don't know if I like it or not. So it's kind of hard to say.
Yep.
So you did 1 out of 2?
I did 1 out of 2.
Gotcha. So we had the same score for aesthetics and characters.
Yep.
Interesting.
Okay, next.
All right, so our fourth category is personal taste and preference. And this is one thing that when Tori and I decided to do this podcast, we only wanted to allow 2 points for personal taste and preference, so that everything else we had to be a little more objective about. And about why,
or at least have a nice argument.
Yeah, have a reason of why we liked or didn't like something. So I might give, if I really like something, I can only weight, my personal taste as a maximum of 2 points. I actually gave this 1.5 out of 2 points. I thought going into this movie I was gonna give it 2 out of 2 because I really, really enjoy this film. However, watching it again for this podcast, I cannot stand that Joe has this locket through the whole movie, and they like hyper focus on this locket being like, and I think my guess is that J.J. Abrams wanted this locket to be kind of symbolic of his grief. It's like his grief and sorrow of his mom is like, him holding on to this locket. But and then at the very end, he lets it go into space with this alien. Like, and we don't have an explanation of like, oh, does the alien just need it to like launch the spaceship, or does the alien need it to like be a part?
It's got the love magic in it. It's gonna shoot him off into space.
Meld with his spaceship, and it's like, just all this metal like merge and like transmute into a spaceship, or is it like powering his spaceship so it can like take off? Like, we don't know. That's never really explained, but I think it's so stupid that here you learn about this boy that loved his mom, and his mom was the one person that loved him more than anybody else and understood him better than anybody else, and it's like, oh, I have this one piece of you, Mom, and I'm just gonna let it go to this alien. Like, I can't stand that. I get that it's supposed to be artistic, like it's supposed to be this like film is art thing, but it infuriates me to no end. I think it's cheesy, like, for him to let it go to the alien because he's letting his grief go. I understand that as like a message of the film, but I think it's so unnecessary. I don't think you need it. I think you can appreciate that Joe and his dad have reconciled. They're standing together at the end. They saved Alice. Like, this relationship he has with his friends has grown, and you don't need him to let go of a locket as a symbol of his growth as a character. I think it's hokey. I think it's a little pretentious. I really don't like it at all. That being said, I think the characters in this movie make it so good. I think Elle Fanning as an actress playing Alice is absolutely phenomenal. The scene where you really first see her as a character, and she's performing the part of Charles's film for the, doing the little rehearsal run through. And when she does that scene, when she does, Joe puts the zombie makeup on her, and he's trying to tell her how a zombie acts, and she does, like, her acting is just absolutely phenomenal. I think that in this movie, I would dare to say that in this movie, she shows more talent than her, at the time, more famous older sister in this film. She just does a great job. I think all the other characters are just so well developed. The acting by their...
Is that a hot take? Sorry to interrupt you.
Is that a hot take?
Do people think that Dakota Fanning is more talented than Elle?
Well,
Because I think Elle Fanning is more... I hate to say that. Sorry to any Dakota Fanning stans or Dakota Fanning yourself, but overall, I've been more satisfied with the performances I've seen from Elle Fanning.
Well, at the time this movie came out, Elle Fanning, who? Like,
that's true.
So, that, you know, nobody knew who she was, except that she was Dakota Fanning's younger sister. And so I think this role really proves that she is just as good, if not a better actress than her older sister. I love that they show the Super 8 film at the end of the film. We kind of already touched on that. I love that the Super 8 film is written and shot like a bunch of middle schoolers made it. I love that no character does anything stupid. There's no betrayal that happens between the friend group. There's no third act breakup where they're like, we're not friends anymore. And, like, I think that's so overused in films today. That doesn't happen.
Especially in movies involving kids.
Yeah.
Or teens.
Yeah, I like that the dad you dislike his poor relationship with Joe, but they don't make him a villain. I like they don't even make Alice's dad a villain.
That's true.
He's a likable, understandable character. There's moments where you're like, this guy sucks, but he's still real and believable, and you're not worried about... I think they could have easily made him a character where you're worried that Alice is going home and living with this guy. He seems like a dangerous man. They portray him in a way...
I think it's realistic because, like, sometimes we suck and do sucky things. Yeah. So it's like, I appreciate a character as long as they give me a moment to understand them. Like, it's fine if they do something sucky.
Yeah. And I love that this film slowly... Like I said earlier, I love that this film is a film about these characters that just happens to have an alien in it. It could have very easily been a stereotypical homage to alien films, homage to 1970s, 1980s films, and it really ended up being its own story about its own characters, and it's the world building and the story delivery and the characters are just so real and believable. So aside from that stupid locket, I gotta give it 1.5 out of 2.
Okay, that's funny because I gave it 2 out of 2.
Oh.
So this is one of those movies where I can kind of take or leave the genre, like, overall.
Yeah.
There are other movies that I think you could kind of classify in the same genre that I enjoy a lot. The Goonies, Stranger Things, like they're all kind of similar genres, but overall I think I can kind of take or leave the genre. It really depends on the movie or show for me. The only like thing, I think this is just personal personality preference, but my least favorite friend in the friend group is Carrie. All he wants to do is blow crap up, and he talks so loud all the time, and I'm like, please shut up for parts of the movie.
What's funny is I knew a middle schooler that's like just like him, and so I feel like I see this kid in him so much. I'm like, he's such like a lunkhead middle school boy. Like, let's blow everything up.
So I think it's just personal personality preference. I think if I had to take away any character in the movie, it would be him, but... Not that I think he's a bad character, just that he annoys me the most of all of them.
I think that's fair. But he is necessary.
He is necessary, so it's fine. And that's why I didn't take away anything from the score.
Yeah.
I do think that this movie is kind of one where it's like, it's easily to be immersed in the story. I think it's kind of difficult to be distracted outside of the story, which I think are good things. It's kind of one of those things where you can just kind of like sit down and watch it and you don't have to like think very hard. Not that I think it's like a shallow film, but I think it's just kind of one of those sorts of pieces of media where it's like, you know, you can have had a tiring day and just, you know, sit down with some popcorn and just like enjoy yourself for 2 hours. And it doesn't like challenge you in like any sort of artistic way or like anything like that.
Yeah.
Which, you know, some days I do want to be challenged, you know, mentally or emotionally. But I think overall, I think in this case, it's a benefit that I can just sit down and watch this movie about these kids and, the crazy things that happen to them and their town and like just enjoy that.
Yeah.
So that's why I just gave it 2 out of 2. I don't have as many notes as you did for this, but
Yeah.
those are mine.
Yeah. And then the last category we have, and I think in all of our scoring sheets, we have 1 point set aside for creativity. Because there's a lot of times you'll watch a movie that, or, engage in any kind of media that is just absolutely horrible, but they did something no one ever did before. And we feel like we should give credit to that. So I think that creativity as its own category is kind of a fun little thing we've got in our system that we developed. I gave it half a point out of 1 for creativity. And I think a couple things that are really unique to this film, the alien being subterranean, I feel like that's that's pretty innovative. I haven't seen that a lot. The fact that when the alien touches people, they get this empath link with the alien. The scientists talked about, how he's in me. I think it's a little hokey sounding, but I think that's really unique. And because he has, I think what I'm kind of guessing is that, like when he picks up Joe at the end of the film, Joe kind of understands that he just wants to leave. He just wants to go home. And so it's almost like he kind of gives him that permission to go home. So he does, which, is kind of, I don't know. You can kind of love it or hate it, but I still think that concept is pretty unique. The reason I didn't give it a full point is I think that I was kind of meh about like the big bad military, the aliens actually the good guy, and the military's the bad guy, and small town America's the good guy, and big government's evil. Like, I think that's, granted, there's a reason that is an archetype, is because it's, there's a lot of people can relate to it, and they can really get engaged with that. But I just think it's meh. I think using an alien, I think the fact that he is an alien is a little overplayed. Aliens being the answer to everything is kind of overused. The sound that they choose, the sound effect they choose to use for the alien, that's every alien sounds like that. Yeah. And
the weird clicks.
Yeah. And then even the fact that they don't show the alien till the end, like at this point in the game, it's really become a trope.
Yep.
So those things I feel like are just a little overdone and overplayed. And so for that reason, I didn't really feel like I could give it a full point as a film overall. But there are some pretty cool aspects, I think, that I've seen in Super 8 as far as, as a film as a whole, that I really haven't seen in a lot of other films.
So this was the hardest category for me.
Was it really?
And I couldn't give it a point at all.
Wow.
I think that's because everything I like about this movie has nothing to do with any sort of level of creativity. Characters can be creative, and I don't want to dismiss that, but I don't believe that any of that really had to do with, like, the production of the film. I think that there are other shows and movies in this genre that do it a bit better.
Mm-hmm.
I think it didn't break any new ground as far as the genre goes, or like even like visually or anything like that. There was nothing, fantastically new about any of it. So I don't say all of this to say that I didn't enjoy it, because obviously I do enjoy this movie, and we talked about a lot of those things that I do enjoy, but all of the things that I enjoy have nothing to do with any sort of like creative, new, out of the box concepts. So 0 points, 0 out of 1 point.
I will kind of rebuttal that just a bit.
Okay.
And I think that's perfectly fine. I would agree. I think a lot of movies have done it better.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say I think it's relative, and I could be wrong. You listeners can fact check me on this, but I feel like Super 8 was one of the very first movies that pioneered this, nostalgic homage to the 70s and 80s era. Like, no,
Okay.
Stranger Things came out later, so a lot of those, the TV shows, they're rebooting the Wonder Years, they're rebooting all these,
Saved by the Bell got a reboot, etc.,
all these
etc.
reboots to make an homage to the 70s and 80s
I didn't
era.
think about that.
Super 8 really kind of pioneered that, okay, now let's reckon back to our childhood days in, late 70s, early 80s.
It's almost like what Grease did to the 50s.
Exactly.
It's like Super 8 did to the 70s.
Right. Except I would almost say, I know this movie takes place in the 70s, the costumes are very 70s, the cars are very 70s, but really a lot of it's kind of right on that cusp of the 80s, and so I feel like it really started people being like, oh, you know what, the 80s were great, and now Stranger Things came out, 5 years later, and exploded the 80s back into popular culture. So I would say, in a way, I think you could, and I kind of thought about that. I forgot to mention, I think I mentioned that in my notes back in plot and story delivery, but I really think that kind of goes in more of the creative category. So I would say that in a way, Super 8 was kind of the first. It was kind of the grandfather of that kind of genre.
I will accept and agree with that point, but I'm not going to change my ranking.
I think that's totally fine.
Okay.
Totally fine.
So, for me, that means an overall score out of 10 for Super 8 is a 7.
And my overall score is a 7.5.
Okay. I was surprised because this was the first one I did prep for.
Yeah.
And I thought I was going to end up higher than this.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting how when you rewatch something, even when you're familiar with it, you re-experience it with a little bit more of a critical eye, and you can kind of see some of the downfalls that maybe you didn't see before, even though they may not be heavy critiques or anything that I would say it's not worth watching, because I think pretty much anything we talk about on this show is going to be worth experiencing it, even if both of us rate it so low. I think we would say we would want everybody that listens to go give it a shot on their own.
Absolutely.
Something that may be a 3 out of 10 for me, maybe a 10 out of 10 for you.
Right.
So, and I think that's going to be one of the cool things about this show as we sort of find our rhythm with it. Is that, art and media is very subjective, and we want that to be something to be talked about and celebrated, and not used as a downfall to anybody's enjoyment of anything.
Yeah, definitely. And if you want to check out Super 8 for yourself, we have links to access of it on our website, lionandmousepodcast.com. We have a section of all our content links, so you can you can download a scoring sheet and watch it and score it yourself and see how you like it.
Okay, so now we're going to move into our lightning round. So this is just a fun thing that we've decided to do, where it's just going to be quick fire questions to each other about that content. So since I picked Super 8 as the topic for this episode, I'll shoot the questions off and we'll both just answer them real quick.
Yeah.
So I'll ask and then you can answer and then I'll answer, if that sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay, favorite character?
Alice Danger.
Mine's Joe. I just think he's so likable.
Yeah.
Least favorite character?
That's a tough one. Probably the... Geez, I don't know. I would either say the Charles's sister is annoying, but also I think the Air Force guy that steals the locket. I would have to say he's my least favorite character because he's stupid.
My least favorite character is Carrie. I talked about him already a little bit, but it's just personal preference. Okay, who is the most underrated side or minor character?
I don't know if he's really underrated, but the doctor guy.
Okay.
Scientist guy.
Interesting pick.
I feel like he's really integral to the plot, but I think he's performed really well. So I think he's kind of underrated.
I think the underrated side / minor character is Mr. Bus Driver. He just made me laugh so much. Okay. Yep. Favorite song from the soundtrack?
My Sharona.
That's my pick too.
Yeah, I know it's the most probably the most popular one.
Yeah.
But I think
I
still.
think just them sitting on the hill eating Twizzlers and singing it out loud is just like a great scene.
Yeah, which did you know that was not intended in the film?
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think it was, if I'm getting this correct, I believe that was just kind of filmed candidly. So they were all just jazzing up and singing. So.
Okay. What's your favorite scene? Or best scene for you?
Alice's introductory scene. So the scene where I would say from when she picks them up in the car until the train crashes. So which I think is technically 2 scenes if you want to. So if I have to pick between the 2, so when she's running through her lines at the train, that would probably be my favorite scene.
I think my favorite scene is when Alice and Joe are watching the projector.
Yeah.
That's my favorite scene,
yeah.
I think.
That's funny. You didn't talk about that a whole lot.
I didn't, but I think it's I think you talked about it a lot, and I just agreed with your points.
I gotcha.
Yeah. Anything that you would have directed differently?
Less lens flares, probably.
Yeah. I think a lot of my direction would be visually as well.
I think I would say, I wouldn't have Joe let go of the daggum locket. I think the creature design on the alien is overall pretty good. But I think that, I think I would have given him like a more unique sound, instead of using that same.
I think one thing I would have directed a little differently is I would have made Colonel Nellick a little bit more likable in the beginning.
That's fair.
I think they paint him too dirty too quick.
Yep.
And there's nowhere for him to go at that point. His character has no change, no shift, no arc, no surprise, no nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Because how you get him from the right out the gate is how he stays through the rest of the movie, and I think it makes him kind of boring as a character.
Yeah.
So I think I would have perhaps started him out a bit more friendly, compliant, happy to help kind of dude, and then we see the shift, or we kind of see like the cracks in the mask, if you will. I think that would have made a bit more of an interesting, conflict, because he is one of the, antagonists of the movie. So.
Yeah. Actually, I kind of want to go back and say most underrated side character. I feel like I kind of want to say Carrie, because he plays every zombie in their Super 8 film.
Fair. Props to Carrie for...
Yeah, which kind of leads you into your next lightning round question.
So what are your thoughts on the Kid Super 8 film?
I think it's great, and I think Carrie does a great job of playing every zombie and dying every single time in different ways. I think they just do a great job. And I love the soundtrack that they use, the music they play, and how they have Charles at the end, like, this has been sitting in an armchair.
With a pipe.
Yeah. I just think it's great. It's just done really well. It's like a bunch of kids did it over a summer vacation. I think it's just done great.
I agree with you. I don't really have much else to add other than I'm so glad that they gave us like the finished product during the credits.
Yeah.
Okay, last lightning round question. Do you have any headcanon for what happens to the characters after the film ends? What do you think? What do you think they're up to?
I think Joe doesn't go to baseball camp. I think his
Really?
dad. Yeah, I think his dad lets up on that. I kind of lean away from the fact that Joe and Alice get together at the end. I think that they might. But I think that their friendship, like their connection and their friendship, probably is just so unique, because there is there's almost no romance into it. It's really just this connection that they have together. So I think Alice and Joe would probably stay friends long term. I think Joe and Charles probably stay friends long term. But like immediately after, I think Joe and his dad probably get really close. I think his dad just got promoted. So, because the sheriff died.
True.
But
Rip sheriff.
Yeah. So, yeah, but I think that I think all the characters do well at the end. That's my headcanon. It's kind of a broad answer, but
I think for my headcanon, I agree that Joe and Jack kind of start to mend their relationship and kind of navigate through their grief together, and I think they both need that. But I also think that Alice's relationship with her father improves. And what is Mr. Daynard's first name? Do you remember? I don't. But I think Mr. Daynard and Jack kind of resolve their like relationship, and I think that sort of happens during the movie, but I think in that way they maybe kind of start to uh be friends because like they've both lost, you know.
Yeah.
And so I think that because of that they can kind of understand each other a little bit better.
Yeah.
And I think maybe because of that, you know, if their dads start to become friends, maybe it would be awkward for Joe and Alice to kind of like pursue anything romantically. So I think I agree with you is that they don't really pursue that, but they just stay friends. They end up working better that way.
Yeah.
So
I think that I in my head canon though, I think the stoner guy and Charles's sister end up together.
Oh, I absolutely think that's
Yeah.
going to happen.
They're just that's no truer love
Yeah.
has ever existed than there. I'm just kidding. That's not true at all.
Well, I could see them dating for sure.
Yeah,
They
I
both
could
kind of
see them-
seem like that.
Yeah.
That sort of fit for each other. But also I think that very soon after Charles's Super 8 film is finished, he would have an idea for a next one. So I think
absolutely.
they would be doing another Super 8 film for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks for joining us on this episode. We look forward to having you back on the next episode. You can follow us on our social medias. We do have Twitter, Instagram, at Lion and Mouse Podcast. And our website is, what is our website?
Our website is lionandmousepodcast.com. You can find our rankings broken down if you'd like some easy reading. We also have a suggestion box where you can tell us what you want us to review next. You can also find links to enjoy some of this content on your own and do this with your own friends and enjoy it. Enjoy the art that we enjoy together, and feel free to make a suggestion and tell us what you'd like us to talk about. And until next time, we will see you in the next episode.
Bye-bye.